Morning and welcome. I started full-time rock lobster fishing in 1989. After a 4-year apprenticeship as a mechanic, I joined the family business, second generation rock lobster fishing. My father bought into the industry in the early 70s. Started off with a little 29-foot cutter, no wheelhouse or anything, and 29 lobster pots. We gradually built it up to a 50-foot planing hull fast boat and 70 lobster pots. In 1995, I took over the fishing operations side of the business, and Dad got off. And then in 2000, my wife and I took over the management side of the business as well. And we've currently got a son that's a couple of years out of finishing his apprenticeship, and when he gets that done, he's keen to jump into the industry as well. During the time that I've been involved in the industry, I've spent 7 years on the Fisheries Management Committee. That was a time that was very interesting because it was when quota was introduced into the fishery, and so that was very controversial. I've also been on the Island Crow Fishermen's Association for all the time that I've been involved in the industry. I'd like to make a big thanks to the Sydney Mire Fund. Without the generous donations from these sponsors, my travels just wouldn't have been possible. And all the team from Nuffield that have just gone above and beyond to make it a mind-blowing experience. So I can't thank them enough. A brief history. In 1967, the state government decided that it was time that maybe the fishery was managed. So they had a 12-month investigation into the fisheries and came up with a management plan. They broke the state into 2 zones, broken at the Murray Mouth, so it's the Western Australian border to the Murray Mouth, and the Murray Mouth to the south of the Victorian border, so northern and southern zones. They introduced a season, and you had to pick where you wanted to fish, which zone, and then they limited the entry, limited trap numbers, and it was basically a closed shop. The only way to get in was to buy someone else out. Since then, there's been a progressive effort reduction, driven mainly by the fishermen, just trying to reduce the amount of effort. We've had a lot of trap reductions, we've mucked around with the time of the seasons, things like that. And the average catch since the inception of management to the mid-80s was about 650 tonnes. And then come the mid-80s, it started rapidly climbing. The catch peaked in 91 at 1,200 tonnes. This is the whole zone catch and not individuals. And then in the year 2000, we started a rapid decline in catch rates. Just through, basically, we got too good at it. Things like coloured echo sounders, computer technology, GPSs, bigger, faster boats travelling to further grounds, and we overfished it a bit. So in 2003, by then we'd tried all sorts of things under input controls to reduce the catch, and it just wasn't working. We were still catching too many. So the fishery had a ballot, and we went to a quota management fishery. It was industry driven, but the quota only just got over the line, so there was a lot of contention about a lot of fishermen not liking their neighbours anymore. We set the quota at 650 tonne, which was the previous long-term average, and for the next 6 years we decreased the quota because we just couldn't get to the number. In 2009 was the first time we got to our total allowable catch, but by then it had dropped down to 310 tonne. 2010-11 we bulk caught it fairly easily, and 2011 and 12 now it looks like we're going to catch it fairly easily again. So next year hopefully we'll get a small increase. My personal quota is only 5 tonne, so I've gone from sort of catching 10 to 12 tonne during the 80s, 90s, down to 5 tonne now. So it's been a significant drop in income. So the aims of my study were to visit the fisheries in the Northern Hemisphere, mainly North America, and where the fisheries are going quite well. They're still having record catches in parts of Canada, and most of America, they're fairly happy with the way things are going. And then over in Europe, the English and Irish fisheries that have been going for about the same amount of time, but they're really struggling. So I want to go and have a look at how they were managing these fisheries, what they were doing to keep them sustainable, how they were trying to rebuild them, and just see what they've done wrong and right over there, so we don't make the same mistakes and try and pick up any good advice that they had. So I compared their fishing equipment, their trap designs, the technology they're using. I wanted to look at the elimination of ghost fishing, which is sort of when we lose a trap, it's stuck on the sea floor and it keeps fishing. And so you're killing fish for no benefit for anything. I wanted to look at issues minimising our bycatch. That's a big thing at the moment, trying to become more environmentally friendly. You only want to catch your target species. And getting minimal interaction with the marine environment. You know, especially your juvenile lobsters, you don't want to be pulling them up to the surface and then re-releasing them. They've got a big chance of predation on the way back down before they find their hole again. I looked at a lot of innovations in research, how far, you know, like what they're doing over there, working out how far their lobster are travelling and how, you know, how you can work out where your spawn's coming from, like, because that's the big unknown. And just general efficiencies that they had in their businesses, the way they caught the fish, and improving our dollars per kilo, because that's the only way in a quota managed fishery. You've got to cut your costs and get more for your product. It's the only way we can make any more money. So I started in the east coast of America. The Bay of Fundy is the best lobster grounds in the world. US and Canada fishing fleets fish the area, and 2/3 of the world's annual lobster catch come out of these waters, with the most productive area being the southern tip of Nova Scotia. I went out with a guy down there, just fishing with him, see how he did it, and the first day of the season he caught 7.8 tonne for the day. That's more than I catch in my whole season. It was mind-blowing. Each country's got broken their area of the bay up into different zones, and they've all got individual management plans. They vary all through the place quite differently, but they're all based on maximum exploitation of the fishery. They've got a lot of research going on over there, done through government departments and a lot of private university studies, and they employ scientists, the fisheries employ scientists to work for them, and they're doing a lot of really good projects that could be well adapted to lobster fisheries all across southern Australia. So I went to Portland in Maine. There they had a place called the Gulf Science Centre. It was a privately run research and education facility. It got government grants for specific projects that the government was interested in, but the majority of their money came from private sponsorship. Like the fuel companies, the gear suppliers, and the general community threw a lot of money, the fishermen threw money into it, and that's really what kept it running. Its main aim was to promote the fishing industry in a positive light and show that fishermen are responsible custodians of the ocean and the resource there. Every year, 5 and 6 students in the state of Maine gets a tour through this facility as part of their school curriculum, and they all get a really hands-on approach at the fishing industry. They get to play with the gear and, you know, look at the fish. There's tanks there where they can grab the lobster and learn all about them. And then they take that message home to the family, you know, and it gets spread through the community quite well. They do a lot of projects there, designing and trialling new fishing equipment, and then they follow that up with training for the fishermen, teaching them how to use this new gear and making the whole industry work a lot better. The concept works really well, and the fishermen are viewed in a very positive light. The general community really realise the value of the fishing industry. Then I went up to Nova Scotia. management began in the fishery there in the early 1900s, and very little's changed since. Most of their management there was based on when the fishermen could actually get out to sea, like the bay's ice over and the weather just gets that bad that they can't fish. So, you know, they base their seasons around that, and it hasn't really changed. They've broken it up into 41 fishing zones there, and each zone has its own management plan. Some of them, the areas where the catches are diminishing a bit, have been a little bit active, but in trying to improve things, but not to a big extent, because the whole thing runs on a majority rule, like it's industry driven, and so you've got to get a consensus among the fishermen before you can change anything, and it's pretty hard to get fishermen to agree on anything. Area 34, which is down the southern tip of Nova Scotia there, that's just having the best catches anywhere, and it just keeps improving. But the inshore fishery there is really starting to struggle, and so the fishermen are travelling further and further out to sea to maintain these good catches, which is sort of fairly similar to what happened to us. So it's a little bit of a scary situation. But I met with the Minister for Fisheries there, and had a good chat with him about it. He's actually an ex-grey fisherman over there, and he's quite happy with it. He's got plenty of faith in the hatcheries. He thinks that they can replenish the stocks if they start overfishing it. His biggest piece of advice to me was, if we want to rebuild our fishery quickly, we've just got to get rid of all the predators. Over there they had a big cod fishery, and they basically fished that to unviability, and the cod ate the lobsters, and there's no cod left, so there's plenty of lobsters. But it's also a bit of a view over there that there's that many traps in the water there that it's almost like aquaculture. And if you start taking traps out, there's not going to be enough food in the bays for the lobsters to keep at their current levels, just with all the discarded bait every day and things like that. So it was very interesting, but I don't know if their management plan really fitted us. So I went to a few scientific research places around Canada. They've been doing a lot of study into the tracking of lobsters. They've done a lot of tagging work, which isn't really anything new. That's been done in lobster fisheries all over the world. But they were doing stuff with these ultrasonic chips that they were putting under the lobster shell, and then they could follow the fish around as they're moving around at the bottom with these big hydrophones that they hang over the side of the boat. And they could follow them all around the bays for, they followed some of them for up to 6 months, and they were worked out where they were moving at different times. When they were moulting, they'd go to one area. When the water started getting cold, they'd go deeper. Things like that, which was fairly interesting. But the most exciting thing that I saw in all my travels was a DNA project that they're trying to get up and running in Canada. It's still being built at the moment, but their aim is to identify the family base of the lobsters so that they can track the female lobster, and then when it spawns, the spawn travels through, floats around in the sea for a while and then settles out on the sea floor. And so if you can work out where your breeding female is and where that spawn's travelling to, you can protect the area that your breeding females are living, and that'll ensure that you've got a good flow of new fish coming into the fishery. It's the biggest question in lobster fisheries all over the world. They're still building the database and trying to identify that specific DNA marker to pick the families, but they're getting there, and the guys that are doing it were really, really keen that there was other people interested. They're quite willing to share their information, and they're actually quite excited that lobster fishermen around the world are keen on what they're doing. They're doing a bit of work on blood protein levels. That's a very simple test that can be done by the fishermen at sea. It's cheap and it's easy and quick. You just take a drop of blood out of the tail of the fish, put it on a little viewer, into a slide, or onto a slide into a viewer, and it comes up a different colour telling you the ultimate time to harvest is what you're looking for. When it'll tell you how far away that fish is from molting, how far away it is from spawning, and the general health of the fish. So you can just take the ones that are in perfect condition. They're also doing fat and starch content tests through the molt stages, but that's more for their marketing, so that they can promote a healthy meat and a healthy food for the people. So I visited some hatcheries in Canada and England. They both had very similar methods of getting their brood stock. They both relied on the fishermen donating spawn females to the hatchery, and then they just placed them in tanks of water about 4 or 5 degrees, where they went into a semi-dormant sort of state until the hatchery staff were ready to bring that spawning on. Then they'd just slowly raise the temperature up to 18 to 20 degrees, and that would induce the spawning, the start of the spawning, and then the eggs would come out and hatch, and they'd harvest them quite simply. Just the water would flow out of the tank through a sieve, and the sieve caught all the juveniles, where then they'd just be placed into tanks like you see on the screen there. For the first 4 days, they were just a floating, they couldn't swim by themselves, so they were just fed powdered brine shrimp that was poured into the tank. And then after 4 days, they'd start to evolve and could start swimming for themselves, so then they were fed live brine shrimp. And they stayed in these tanks till they grew up to the size of about 25 mil, and they grow fairly fast. They're a lot faster than now, so that only took about 14 days. Then they were transferred back to the fishermen and put on their boats and taken out to sea and pumped to the sea floor with divers. They just had a 100 mil hose and just pumped them back down to the bottom. And it significantly raises the survival rate, because you've taken during the most vulnerable stages of their life, you've protected them, and then you're putting them back into their ideal habitat on the sea floor. So it was working really well. The English were doing it a little bit different, in the sense that they were more looking at different foods that will enhance the growth of the fish, trying to get a faster growth rate, and looking at changes in the environment and the effect that's having on the lobster. They had a lot of emphasis in England on fisheries awareness as well. Like it was almost like a tourist centre with a hatchery out the back, and so they were promoting the industry a lot, but they weren't doing a lot in the way of rebuilding it. So it was good, but yeah, I think the Canadians were doing it a lot more professionally. So I looked at trap designs. During my travels, I saw many and varied different sorts of traps. Our trap's sort of been a standard trap that we've had to use since the inception of management, the whole time up until quite well. We still have to use the same trap, and it was built to limit the catch. Like, the fish can still get out of our traps quite easily, and it's not ideal now that we've moved to a quota fishery. There's no need for that. So if we can improve our design, it'll reduce the days that we need to be out there fishing. That'll lower our costs. It'll lower our bycatch rates. It'll be less mortalities that we'll get from predators, because you haven't got trapped fish in there for as long. And it's a lower number of juveniles removed from their natural environment. So the less time we've got pots in the water, the less impact we're having on the whole marine environment. So, better traps although it sounds a bit funny when you're trying to rebuild a fishery to get a trap that works better, it would actually be a big step forward in rebuilding the entire fishery and becoming more environmentally friendly. So in my conclusions, I looked at management plans all over the Northern Hemisphere, and I think that the plan that we've got at the moment is as good or better than any of the ones I saw around the world. Although it needs to be constantly changing as the fishery evolves. The DNA project in Canada has got benefits for lobster fisheries around the world. It's, you know, knowing where your breed stock is just the key to sustainably managing a fishery. Improvements in trap design, they just make good sense. You know, if we can get out there, catch our fish quicker, have less impact on everything, lower running costs, that's more profitability for us, and everybody's happy. We've got a big need to be viewed, the fishing industry in general, to be viewed as caring for the environment. It's going to be crucial that we get public support with the onset of these marine parks coming in. We're looking at losing a lot of fishing grounds, and so we need the public behind us thinking that we do care. We're not just out there raping and pillaging the sea. So we need a bit of help with them to maintain the access to the areas that we've traditionally fished. And by maintaining a top quality product, we can guarantee that we're going to be right up there in the marketplace and keeping the top dollar value for our lobster. So I'd like to say thanks to the Sydney Mire Fund and all of those in Nuffield, Australia that have just made this a brilliant journey. It's a trip that money can't buy, you know, just the doors that it opens for you. It's life-changing. I'd like to thank my fellow scholars, the guys that travelled with me through the Global Focus. They made it a really good time. And most of all, I'd like to thank my wife Carrie, my boys Damon and Joe for letting me take a few months out of their lives and travel the world and have a look. Thanks very much.
Are there any questions for Ben?
Ben, I was really interested in the model of growing juveniles and putting them back in the wild. Did you see any examples in any part of the world where they grew the juveniles in the aquaculture mode to adulthood? And is there any research between the quality and taste of the aquaculture type fish to the wild caught fish?
They're not doing it in a big scale anywhere that I came across. Basically, because the growth time is too long. Like, they grow up to the 25 mil quite quickly, but to get them out to a marketable size, you're looking at sort of 4 to 5 years. And so the running costs of keeping them going that long, it's not really viable. It has been done just to make sure they could do it, but on a commercial scale, it's not viable at the moment. You know, probably with a bit of genetic engineering, things like that, you could make them grow a bit quicker, and so into the future, it probably will happen, but at the moment, it's not.
What would be the chances of having a hatchery of your own in your part of the world to increase your ability to catch?
Our lobster are slightly different, like they are a different species, and ours travel for 12 months or so in the sea, like floating in the sea column, before they evolve completely into a lobster. They go through about 13 different stages. So it's very hard to simulate the conditions that they need to evolve through that. And as well, that has been done. They have managed to do it, but at the moment, not on a commercial scale. Like, they are looking into it, but ours are a bit trickier than the Northern Hemisphere ones.
Ben, can you talk a bit about the industry and your access to other industry people? Like, is it easy to get into through the door, or is it difficult, or what's the story?
I didn't really struggle with it. I sort of just did a Google search and banged out letters to every fisherman and every scientist and every manager that I could come up with, and probably a third of them responded back, and the ones that did respond were very keen to, you know, to be involved and share some knowledge. How much, I've met with an old fisherman in Portland. I was just wandering down the jetty there one day, and there was this old guy sitting on his boat, just mending a bit of gear. So I started having a bit of a yarn to him, and next thing I'm down on his boat, and he just happened to have an esky. So I gave him a couple. And we sat there for a couple of hours having a bit of a yarn. And at the end of it, he said to me, "You know, mate, there's only one time you can guarantee that a fisherman's telling you the truth." So okay. When he tells you that all the other fishermen are liars. So, yeah, I might have wasted an afternoon there, but yeah.
What about, sorry, just another question, what about within the industry in Kangaroo Island or in South Australia? What's it like there?
It's challenging. There's the average age of the licence holder in the northern zones about 59, 60 years old. So there's a lot of guys that are still doing it the way Grandpa did it, and it's hard to get the older generation to look at change. So that's and the price and the state of the fishery, the price of buying in, the state of the fishery now, it's not really encouraging for young guys to be getting into it. So there are a few challenges just convincing some of the older fishermen that we need to change things and we need to do things differently. But when you start showing dollar values, most people come around.
You mentioned that the species that is predating on them in Canada is being fished out. What is the main predators of yours in Australia, and are they commercially fished?
Our biggest predators are like leather jackets, octopuses, things like that, and they're not really commercially fished, just because they're such a low value fish. So ideally, I'd like to just get a trawler and go out and catch the lot and dump it. You know, but that's not really the way the world's heading.
Max?
Well done, Ben. So a couple of questions. Obviously, with your quotas and things, it's obviously reduced your fishing time. So what do you do with the rest of your time? And the other thing is, when you've got the product and you're talking about trying to get a higher value for your product, is what are you actually doing to marketing to improve the value?
Well, I'll answer. Yeah, I don't work a ruler. Last season just gone, I only fished for 53 days. But then I had my Nuffield, so that took up a lot of that time. After that, but this winter just gone, I actually got a job up on Barrow Island, just month on, month off up there, working on a support vessel for the gas industry. And it turned out to be that good that I've stuck at it, and so I'm just doing my fishing in a month off at the moment. So that's actually stretched my fishing time out a bit. I've still got about 600 kilo to catch this season. And I've probably fished about 65 days so far, so I'm not quite as efficient as I was when I was doing it full time, but I'll still catch it, no worries, and it's sort of working well at the moment. As far as our markets go, probably 90% of our fish go live to China, and that is a scary thing, because if the Chinese market falls over, we're buggered. But at the moment, they're the only ones that, well, they're paying the most. So, although you could go into all your risk strategies and try and spread your market out, it's hard to get somebody to sell something for $30 or $40 a kilo when the Chinese are paying 60. So we are heavily reliant on the one market.
You talked about the perception of your industry and the community thinking that you're going to be in the sea waters. What has your industry done to actually address that? Are there any programs or?
we've got a great little thing going on at the end of April. It's called a Beer on the Pier, and it's sort of a seafood festival on the island that's been advertised extensively along the eastern, through the eastern states and Maine and Australia. And that the whole idea of that is to get people in, you know, see the fishing gear, see what we have done to improve things and making us look, you know, showing that we do really care. You know, we'll have a lot of gear there, we'll have boats and, you know, jazz bands and obviously beer. And a lot of seafood, is, you know, so you can come down, you can see how we catch it, you can taste it, you can, you know. So it's just a small step, but and then there is the Women's Industry Network that are trying to put programs together to run through schools and things like that, because it's also an industry that there's not a lot of young guys coming into. You know, the shine's really gone out of it. You know, back in the 80s you could come on and jump on as a deckie and make some really good money, whereas now you sort of, although you're not working for long, you're probably not making much more than a council worker as a deckhand, you know, but you're doing it quick.
And just in regards to your trap design, you obviously looked at quite a good trap design. Was there any countries that really stood out with their traps and trap design that you could bring back and implement here in Australia and make it catch more fish?
I have been playing around with a few different designs. As yet, I haven't got one that's catching a lot better than our current trap, but I have made a few alterations to ours that have basically eliminated the interaction with marine mammals, so that's been a fairly good step forward. But as far as getting one that works, you know, the traps from there aren't ideal for our conditions. Like I tried an American design pot, an English design pot, you know, just basically went home in the shed and built one. And they didn't outfish ours. In fact, they didn't work very well at all. But I'm sure, you know, with a bit more tweaking, we can get something a lot better than what we've currently got.
Ben, what's happening around, like obviously we're to the northern hemisphere, what's happening around the coast of Australia as far as the impacts? Is this happening in your region? Is it similar along the west coast as well?
Our whole zone is struggling. The southeast zone in South Australia went through some real boom times as well. Then they had a couple of bad years. They're a lot more stable than us. Our fishery hasn't got the vast amounts of bottom. Like you go down the southeast of the state and there's a lot more cray habitat down there than we've got. Ours is more just rocks and desert out there, and the crays won't live in the desert. So ours don't move a real lot in the sense that they'll find a rock and they'll spend most of their life there. So our fishing area is not as big as theirs. You know, although our coastline's probably more, we haven't got the habitat on the sea floor to sustain as many fish as they have.
Thank you. And I think we should leave it there. Thank you very much. Well done.